If you're a shareholder today, what does this really mean for you? What's going through your head?
Well, I mean, one question is whether the Twitter's board is leaving money on the table. The stock was at over, $70 last July, 66 in October. Um, so that's a big question. But I think the bigger concern for us, our main concern, is the consolidation of Musk's power. That's not to say anything about who he is as a person, but the simple fact that you've got the world's richest man in charge of the world's biggest megaphone. We don't know what his intentions are, other than a blanket statement to uphold free speech. And we've often been critical of companies that have the same person as CEO and chairman, right? Because it creates an echo chamber effect where divergent perspectives aren't considered. But this is even worse. It's akin to a kid packing up his toys, going home to play by himself. And unfortunately, the consequences of this game are much greater than Elon Musk.
So, what are the potential consequences here? Do you think this will raise the attention of regulators, specifically the SEC, potentially other regulatory bodies here in the United States? And what about regulators around the world?
I think that it will. I mean, in some ways, with the company going private, and a big concern, for us is that it will be shielded from regulatory scrutiny. It will be shielded from the impact of investors like Arjuna Capital that, we lend perspective on ESG or environmental, social, and governance practices that the company may otherwise ignore. The problem is that the impact of Twitter, it's not limited to Musk's whims. It can have severe consequences on our society and our democracy. The insurrection on the Capitol, that's just one example. And so I think that there will be regulatory consequences, but they're not going to play out the same way that they have, right? Rolling out the carpet, bringing, Twitter's CEO in front of Congress, not that kind of regulation. This space probably needs some regulation, but the complexity of these issues is so profound. And we've really been pushing for human and civil rights expertise to be built into the board, to be built into business strategies, so that the company itself is taking on these issues, not waiting for regulators to do it. And we had that proposed at the company's annual meeting for this spring, although that conversation now appears moot.
Well, and now Elon Musk will be taking on the complexity of those issues with no shareholders to answer to. Twitter, as a private company, making these very complex, consequential decisions that impact public discourse. What's your sense of how he will take on that challenge?
I mean, I think it's a big question mark, but if you go back to when Dorsey was running the company, a big criticism is that he was distracted. He was distracted by being the CEO at Square, now Block. And Musk is running multiple companies. He's got Tesla, he's got SpaceX, the Boring Company, which is drilling holes under LA. He's got Neuralink, which is linking, the human brain to computers. And honestly, how many hours does Musk have to spend on this? In my opinion, Twitter is too important to be a hobby and really requires the full-time attention of whomever is leading it.
Right. Jack Dorsey just left the company, potentially in part because he had two really big jobs. I want to go back to this question for shareholders. Do you really think they're getting potentially a bad deal here and leaving money on the table? I mean, Twitter shares haven't been at $70 for some time, and longtime investors have been waiting a while for any kind of momentum to pick up in the price.
I mean, I hear you there, but I mean, the stock was at 66 in October. And, as you heard from a previous analyst, Twitter has been growing ad revenue. The name of the game for Twitter was to grow subscribers. I'm very interested to see, what Musk does with this. If he does indeed bring it to a subscription model, that's obviously going to limit user growth. And in some ways, from a social perspective, if we're thinking about Twitter as the de facto town square, it could further isolate users because who wants to pay for an increasingly toxic platform?
What do you think this, I know you're a longtime activist investor, including in Facebook. What do you think Elon Musk buying Twitter means for Facebook?
I think that I think that it's sad to see sort of the emperors of social media, if you will. We've had for a long time have been critical of Mark Zuckerberg's position and power, given his 14% ownership in Facebook, but also his role as CEO and chairman. And here you have Elon Musk potentially owning the entire company and being able to do whatever he wants with it. I mean, there is a history of billionaires buying media companies, and you have to ask why. Going back to Hearst and look at Bezos buying the Washington Post. This isn't something new. But again, it really brings up those concerns of the consolidation of power, especially when there's such a huge impact on our public discourse, our democracy, human and civil rights, and free speech.